In this set of slides, we'll be looking at the first two of the 5 family theories and taking a look at what they have to provide, the things that we want to keep from them, and the things that we might not. So, let's begin. The first family theory that I'd like to share with you is called structural functionalism. Structural functionalism was the family theory proposed by a man named Talcott Parsons, and he was doing much of his work in the 1950s. Structural functionalism winds up describing the family as we might think of Ward and June Cleaver back in the Leave It to Beaver television program. This is the nuclear family, we might say, as was described at that time. There are 4 required functions of family for structural functionalism as defined by Talcott Parsons, and they are reproduction and regulation of sexuality, the maintenance of property within a family, social placement, that is, where on the social scene does an individual fall. His or her family pretty much determines that, at least at the beginning, in a non-stratified or rigidly stratified society such as our own. In a rigid stratified society, social placement may be a permanent condition. And finally, the nurture and the socialization of the young. How does structural functionalism view marriage? Remember, this is the first of our questions that we are asking of all the different theories we look at. And here we find out that marriage as a relationship has 2 unique and unalterable roles: the instrumental role and the expressive role. The instrumental role, or the providing role, is that most often taken by the male in the relationship, and the expressive, or that dealing with feelings and nurture, by the female. Already you can begin to see how this tied in very nicely in the 1950s, but that today this perspective is you don't find theorists today who hold this perspective. In fact, when I was taking these classes and felt myself drawn most closely to structural functionalism, I found myself pretty much alone in the classroom. Our next question is the question regarding parental relationships. The parent-child relationships in structural functionalism has 4 gender roles: mother, father, daughter, and son. Each of these has rights and responsibilities or obligations that are to be fulfilled. And it's the role and duty of the parents to socialize the children as they fulfill the instrumental and expressive roles. That is to say, the boys find out what it means to become a man by watching dad, and the girls find out what it means to be a woman by watching mom. So the parents socialize the children into their future roles as the mother and father themselves fulfill the instrumental and expressive roles. As you can also tell then from this perspective, if one of those happens to be missing, it creates some significant deficits in the life of the child. So what then is the family? Well, the family, as it is organized around a unique and unalterable type of role structure, operates or functions for something larger than itself. What does that mean? It means that when families are healthy, the society itself is healthy. If family life deteriorates, the culture and the society are built around those families will also deteriorate. But notice also in this definition that it calls this structure unique and unalterable. And of course that too is a perspective that is really not quite popular today, when we want to make just about any role or function fungible among whoever we would want to have hold it. A structural functionalism would say, no, dad needs to be dad, mom needs to be mom. More or less as a side note, we see that this is the nuclear or benchmark family. In a study that was done in the early 1990s, we discover that 20% of families believed in or lived the benchmark family back in the early 1990s. 60% of families believe in but do not live the benchmark families, and 20% of families reject the benchmark family. My guess is in the 20 years or so since that study was done by the Yankelevich research group, there's been probably some changes in these statistics. My guess now is that there's probably more families that are rejecting the benchmark. And one identifying characteristic of a family rejecting the benchmark would simply be living together without benefit of marriage. Structural functionalism, then, as we would look at it in terms of positives and negatives, what does it provide? What doesn't it provide? It seems to be a reflection of Genesis chapters 1 through 3, where Adam has his role and Eve has her role in the garden. And when we look at the curse oracle in Genesis 3, where God drives Adam and Eve out of the garden, we notice that the curse placed on each is different. For Eve, it's the pain of childbirth and her affection turned toward her husband. That's where sin will oftentimes find itself evident in the world following the fall. Whereas for Adam, it's his work. By the sweat of his brow, he will toil in the fields to bring forth his bread. And so we see this different direction given toward man and woman as they leave the garden. Woman toward family and relationships, man toward work and production. Another positive, we would say, is that it indicates a recognition of falling short, creating the opportunity for law and gospel, as Lutheran Christians see law and gospel, to function within families. Structural functionalism, obviously by holding up an ideal of what family ought to be, functions as a way of comparison, so families can understand and identify where they have fallen short. And thirdly, it provides an authority structure for the family. There's roles to be fulfilled, authorities to be attended to. Now, there are some negatives to take into account here, such as the rigidity of roles, and that leaves structural functionalism much less adaptable than other approaches, other theories. By this, I mean, okay, so the husband is to be the provider. Does that deny him the possibility of also being nurturing or also providing a sense of feeling and emotion to the family itself? Tying too tightly into these rigid roles actually creates its own set of problems. And also, we have the difficulty that when there are deficits that we assume, those deficits can stigmatize. So one could grow up in a broken family and therefore, because the family is broken, consider oneself much less ready for the adult roles in life. Now, one more slide here on structure. So in terms of family values, what would structural functionalism put into the safe? What would it want to make sure would not be lost? Well, the parental roles, a focus on the needs of the child, and the recognition that society itself benefits when families are intact and functioning well. If we were in a group, and I was showing these slides, as I have in the past, this would be a question up for discussion at this point. I'd want you to compare the structural functionalist picture of the family with your own. What is similar? What is different? And take those observations and share them with your neighbor. You might want to take and share them with a spouse. Now we're going to move on to our next slides on a different family theory, and this will be family systems theory. So what is family systems theory about? Well, first of all, as we put on the glasses and look through the lenses of family systems, what we see are a set of terms to be aware of. Terms such as boundaries, that is, a system has a boundary within which it works, and families have boundaries. The term homeostasis, meaning that there is a level of comfort that one finds within a system, and that when something knocks the system out of kilter, and suddenly things are unbalanced, it works to bring itself back into balance toward that homeostatic, familiar, and comfortable level. Morphostasis means that there are many different forms that a family could take in its system and still function. And morphogenesis means that the family can regenerate itself, so to speak, into different forms when necessary. For example, the intact family that goes through the loss of one parent due to cancer. While that certainly knocks the family out of its homeostatic relationship, eventually it will form into a new comfort zone for all the participants in that family. Another term is entropy. That is, things tend to stay the same as long as nothing intervenes from the outside. And equifinality, meaning that there are many different routes to a final goal within a family system, so that families look very, very different from one another and yet can achieve the same role. Two other points are extremely helpful, and that is cohesion and adaptability as they're understood regarding one's family of origin. Now, we already did the family genogram, so that was your study of your family of origin. Family systems would say that there's two qualities that are especially important that one learns in one's family of origin, and then, upon marriage and the formation of a new family, begins to negotiate with the spouse. And these are the two characteristics: cohesion, which is togetherness, how often are we to be together, and adaptability, that is, how flexible and open to change can we be within our particular family system. Now think of it in terms of this. Some families seem to be together all the time. They have a high level of cohesion. Others, much less. Think of a military family where one spouse might be out on the ship for 6 months at a time. So you can see there that in that particular family, togetherness, while certainly important, is going to be demonstrated more in a different way than in the family that tends to always be together. Likewise, with adaptability and change within a family, are the roles always the same, or can Dad cook supper occasionally? So, in family systems, what exactly is the family? Well, the family is composed of interacting individuals, and these individuals desire varying levels of cohesion and adaptability. And getting back to those again, remember what it means for the young couple to decide where do they go for the holidays, whose parents get visited, and for how long. Those are issues of cohesion and adaptability. In family systems, movement in any part of the system affects the entire system. And this creates a very hopeful kind of family theory in that small changes here and there can carry big benefits down the road. How does family systems theory view marriage? Well, as one might expect, the marriage relationship is the most important subsystem in the larger family system. It's what sets the boundaries and the communication behaviors that are going to take place. In family systems, how is the parent-child relationship viewed? Well, as you might expect, the parent-child relationship is another subsystem that is hierarchical and bidirectional. Let me define those terms for us. Hierarchical means that there are authorities. Generally, it's going to be mom and dad. and bidirectional, meaning that the child is not powerless in the relationship. And anyone who has had infants in the household realizes that the infant has a tremendous amount of power and authority over the parents. So the system is really not as authoritarian as one might suspect. No, within a family system, the child has authority and power as well, and in fact, learning to negotiate and make use of that power is part of what it means to grow up within a family, and certainly when you've got brothers and sisters. In family systems theory, then, what are some of the things that we wish to keep, and what are some things that we'd rather not? Well, first of all, we recognize that family systems theory is really good at description, but doesn't actually explain the whys behind the behaviors that are observed. Secondly, family systems theory can be used to legitimize dysfunctional family systems. So there's an abusive relationship, well, that just happens to be the system of that particular family. No, we really wouldn't be satisfied with saying, yes, that's an adequate system when members within that system are being abused. What we can hold on to is that family systems theory is very hopeful. Small changes can pay big dividends for family life. You know, if behaviors of a husband and wife that they've developed over the years, when they get home in the evening, set each other off. And here, let's look at it this way. You know, father's been talking all day. He doesn't want to listen for a while to anybody. Mom has been working with the children all day. She needs a good adult conversation. They have different conflicting needs at the end of the day. Well, in that situation, teaching new behaviors can be very helpful and possibly correct much of what's at loggerheads between the two. Give Dad 5 to 10 minutes to just go down in the basement, sit in his cave, and when he's ready, he'll come out and then he'll talk. And then the needs of both can be met. What then is of most value for family systems? What's going to be locked in the safe to make sure that it doesn't go anywhere? Well, in family values, we would find healthy relationships, time together and time apart, and stability and flexibility. Each of those two bipolar categories, the cohesion and flexibility, being at a healthy, moderate level. What else? Well, what I just described was basically the Goldilocks principle. Not too hot, not too cold, but just right. Now, if we were in a group, or if you are in a group and you have an opportunity for discussion, here's the question for discussion. How do I deal with cohesion, togetherness, and adaptability, change, in my own family? Well, this brings this particular set of slides to a conclusion, but it only takes us through 2 of the 5 family systems we'll be looking at. The next set of slides, part 3 of this series, will take you into the next 3 family theories that we're examining in our course.